the County Observer and Monmouthshire Central Advertiser, Abergavenny and Raglan Herald, Usk and Pontypool Messenger, and Chepstow Argus introduce us to the life and exploits of the renowned King Arthur and his Knights of the Round Table. May 13th, 1871, Saturday. A legendary romance, an introductory chapter. So we will enter the legendary realm of King Arthur as recorded in the archives of the National Library of Wales for the newspaper of the County Observer and Monmouthshire Central Advertiser, Abergavenny and Raglan Herald, Usk and Pontypool Messenger, and Chepstow Argus. This newspaper was probably founded around the year 1854. However, the first online record entries in the National Library start at 1867. The great and wonderful achievements attributed to this prince are supposed by many to be the offsprings of the fertile imaginations of the ancient legend and romance writers. Be that as it may, the history of the exploits of King Arthur and his Knights of the Round Table has in all ages been a favourite one. The history of this renowned prince, so wrapped in mystery, doubt and fable, was chanted by troubadours, recounted in the Baron's banquet hall, listened to with breathless anxiety by Lady Fair, engrossed the pale student on his midnight studies, puzzled the erudite churchman, and enchanted all listeners during the chivalrous ages, and even in the present day has been the subject of epic poems by the most talented of our land. The mightiest chiefs of British song scorned not such legends to prolong. They gleam through Spenser's elfin dream and mix in Milton's heavenly theme, and Dryden in immortal strain had raised the table round again. Caxton, in his wish to minister to the public appetite, 1485, took it as one of his first printed books. Again, in AD 1553, in the time of Mary, Queen of England, the history appeared to be in great request, for Roger Ascham, the tutor of the amiable but unhappy Lady Jane Grey, says, "I know the time when God's Bible was banished the court, and Mort d'Arthur received into the prince's chamber. Since this period, various have been the versions afloat of the life and heroic deeds of King Arthur and his companions, and several individuals, including the famous Jack the Giant Killer, have been set down as the veritable King Arthur." Southey says that in his time it had a marvellous attraction for boys, and writer in an old number of Blackwood tell us, in one large public school, a solitary copy in two disreputable little paper-bound volumes claiming to belong to Walker's British Classics, even that edition must have been scarce, was passed from hand to hand and literally read to pieces at all hours, lawful and unlawful. And the spell works to this day. Boys seize upon the volumes still wherever they may fall in their way, and sit absorbed in them as did their forefathers. They will tell you more of Sir Bagdemagus and King Pellinore in a week than they can of Hector and Diomed at the end of a school half-year. The taste is a genuine one on their part, wholly independent of Mr. Tennyson and his fellow poets. Explain it how we will. For some time, the romance of the Round Table had been laid on the shelf by the poets and romancers, but at last Lord Lytton revived its theme, and later still the poet laureate Tennyson enchanted his admirers by his exquisite Idylls of the King. To the schoolboy, the tale is one of infinite delight and wonder, and to those of mature age, the exploits of Arthur have something akin to the interest created by the inimitable Punch among the modern exhibitions. For where did man, woman, or child ever pass his popular street exhibition without halting to listen to the queer tones uttered by this incorrigible puppet, and not enjoy an inward laugh at his expense? Amongst other statements, we find one which appears to be an authentic account of the descent of the warlike prince, which is as follows. At the time of the departure of the Romans from Britain, Edric became king of Glamorgan and Gwent, Monmouth. He was succeeded by Meric, Urban, Kinau, and Theodric, or Tudric. The latter flourished towards the end of the 5th century. He defeated a party of Saxon invaders at Pont Saison near Tintern, and was buried at Mathern near Chepstow. He was succeeded by his son Meric, whose son was Arthurus, supposed to be the celebrated King Arthur of Cambrian romance. The court of this King Arthur, or Arthurus, was held at Caerleon, but after his death, the Saxons made such frequent incursions into the district that his son Morgan, the 23rd King of Gwent, removed his court further westward and resided sometimes at Cardiff and sometimes at Margam, Glamorganshire, which gave rise to the name of the county to which he removed, and it was called after him Gwlad Morgannwg, or the land of Morgan, whilst Monmouthshire, the land he quitted, retained the name of Gwent. One of the legends, however, traces the descent of Arthur from Uther Pendragon, king of Britain, from whom he had been separated from the time of his birth, and brought up by a knight named Sir Ector as his son until some time after the death of his father, when he was produced by the great prophet Merlin, who had a hand in his removal when an infant, and through whose agency he was in a most romantic manner proved as the rightful successor to Uther Pendragon, king of Britain, and was crowned by Dubricius, bishop of Caerleon, at Cirencester, AD 506. The scenes of King Arthur's exploits, as well as the place of his birth, has been fixed at Cornwall and in North Wales, as well as in South Wales. William of Malmesbury says, Arthur was a man worthy to be celebrated, not by idle fiction, but by authentic history. And Lord Bacon says, there is enough to make Arthur famous, besides that which is fabulous. Some of the most terrible battles ever recorded is connected with the great Arthur, whose memory, linked as it is with legend and mitre, will ever remain cherished and honoured by the Welsh. This hero of battle and romance is extolled equally in the south of France and in the north of England, and he must unquestionably have been throwing aside much of the poetic fiction with which he is clothed, a prince of the true heroic standard, for it is absurd to imagine that a mere petty ruler, only achieving ordinary feats of prowess, could have won so much celebrity, and we are therefore compelled to regard him as deserving high rank in British history. So great was the renown of this British prince throughout Europe that even after the overthrow of the Saxon kingdoms by William of Normandy, upwards of 4 centuries after Arthur's death, a hope was raised in the British mind of Arthur's reappearance to fight their battles, and vaster might was ascribed to the hero of the Cymric race than to any other that ever lived. As chivalry was then growing to be an institution, and the Crusades causing much excitement, Arthur was taken as the central figure in all the fables of knightly romance, which were framed by the French as well as the Germans, and round him was woven every deed by which the sacred profession of arms could be illustrated, and imaginary perfection of chivalrous excellence displayed. In Normandy, an attempt was made to raise up Rahul, the founder of the duchy, to a similar pitch of renown, but it utterly failed, although the Lay of Roland, as he was called, was chanted at the Battle of Hastings, but in Germany, the glory of Charlemagne and his paladins, and especially of Roland, whom the Italian poets celebrated as Orlando, long disputed the palm with Arthur and the Round Table. Italy recounted the praise of the Frankish heroes, but they borrowed their incidents from what had been narrated of the British knights. Spain affords an illustration of the firm hold the class of stories of this kind had upon the cultivated mind of Europe. The first chivalric romance of Vasco Lobeira's Amadis de Gaula not only has its scene in Wales, but most of its characters are derived from that country also, as if Britain were the cradle of true knighthood and of the glorious profession of war. Respecting the life and exploits of King Arthur, romantic fiction has said so much that history is almost ashamed of the little she has to tell. The hero was in every probability one of the chieftains of the southwestern part of Britain, and it appears to be certain that he acted as supreme leader in the contest maintained against the West Saxons. Whether he fought in any other part of the island we cannot tell, for the tale of Nennius has so much fiction interwoven with what appears facts that any attempt to fix the locality of the 12 battles he ascribes to Arthur is quite out of the question. His presence at the Battle of Longworth by the River Flannan is spoken of by Slywatch Hain. His last battle was at Camlan against his nephew Medraud, whose treachery to his uncle and Britain in joining the Saxons is condemned in the Triads with as much bitterness as the conduct of Vortigern is. The account given in Nennius exhibits to us a full-grown legendary character. It runs as follows, altered to make it suit modern readers. In those days, Arthur, with the other British kings, fought against the Saxons, he being commander in the wars, and in every battle he was the conqueror. Arthur means the dreadful bear, or iron mace, wherewith the teeth of the lions are dashed to pieces, and Mab Uther signifies dreadful son. For from his very boyhood he was cruel. His first fight was at the mouth of the River Glem, which some suppose to be the Glen in Northumberland, and others the Glem in Lincolnshire, and others again the Glevy in Devonshire. The second, third, fourth and fifth happened at another river called the Douglas in the region named Linuas. The sixth battle was on the river Bassus, and the seventh in the forest of Caledon, that is, Cat Coit Caledon. His eighth victory was gained at Gunnion Castle, where Arthur bore on his shoulders the image of the cross of Christ and of the Blessed Mary, ever Virgin, and the pagans fled on that day, and many fell, for sore discomfiture was upon them through the power of our Lord Jesus Christ and his Blessed Mother. The ninth was fought at Caer Legion, the 10th on the banks of the river Ribroit, the 11th on a mountain called Agned Cathragonon, Somersetshire, and the 12th was at Mount Badon, in which 840 men fell by the sole attack of Arthur. None but he laid them low. Whatever different ideas there may be as to the identity of King Arthur, all accounts point to the city of Caerleon on Usk, or the city of the Legion, as the spot where King Arthur held his court, and as the scene of many of the exploits and incidents connected with his history. Caerleon in those days was the capital of 15 important stations in Siluria, and the suburbs on both sides of the river were supposed to have covered a tract of country 9 miles in circumference. In the year 521, it was one of the 3 great cities of Britain and was an archbishopric. The town in the present day presents a great contrast to what history has described in to have been in early ages, in being now an inconsiderable market town containing about 1,200 inhabitants, with narrow, irregular streets and very few good houses, the principal portion being in a dilapidated and ruinous condition. Vestiges of its ancient grandeur and magnificence are, however, still to be found, the result of excavations being that statues, altars, columns, sarcophagi, fibulae, rings, seals, vases, brass and silver coins, and fragments of lamps and crosses have been discovered from time to time and carried off by collectors of antiquities. At a short distance from the town, the most perfect part of the original wall is to be seen. The wall is about 13 feet in height and 10 or 12 in breadth, closing a great portion of 2 fields. Enclosed within the wall is the Campestrian amphitheatre, an oval concavity in the ground, with sloping banks 75 yards by 64, called King Arthur's Round Table. Around this hollow, stone seats and many interesting relics have been dug up. In Caerleon is a museum in which these relics of antiquity are deposited. We now come to chapter 1 of this history. Much of the wild and wonderful in these rude isles might fancy cull, for hither came in times afar stern Norsemen, sons of roving war, kings of the main, their leader brave, their barks the dragons of the wave. Scott. Vortigern the Cruel, arrival of Hengist and the Horsa in Britain. Rowena's beauty captivates Vortigern. Vortimer chosen king. Vortimer poisoned by Rowena. Vortigern restored to the throne. The massacre of 460 knights at Stonehenge. Building of the castle for Vortigern. Merlin discovered in the streets of Carmarthen. Merlin's prophecies. The battle of the dragons. The birth of Arthur foretold by Merlin. Death of Vortigern. Britain in the 5th century had several kings, and from the Tweed to the English Channel was occupied by 3 chief tribes, the Cymry, the Britons, and the Llogerians, of which the last named was the most powerful. Now, among these kings was one Vortigern, who by murder and perfidy became king and ruled over the Britons. The whole of his reign was stained by cruelty and villainy, and to him may be ascribed all the disasters which led to the dismemberment of the kingdom and for giving the Saxons a footing in Britain. The Britons had over them 30 flamens or bishops and 3 archflamens or archbishops. The archbishops were stationed in London, York and Caerleon on Usk, the latter had superiority over the other two, and the first church established in Britain was at Llandaff. In the 4th year after Vortigern had become ruler of Britain, there appeared on the coast of Kent 3 warred vessels commanded by Hengist and the Horsa, 2 Tutist ealdormen who had been invited over to the island by this cruel monarch to assist him in expelling the Picts and Scots. The 3 barks, with their stalwart crews, floated beneath the tall cliffs of Albion, and the hardly pressed king engaged the eager warriors to do battle against his foes, and for their services he agreed to bestow upon them the island of Thanet. To the eyes of these men of Jutland, Britain seemed fair indeed, and tidings soon reached the fatherland of the favoured isle their swords may win. It induced fresh hordes in the following year to cross the sea to share the good fortune of their countrymen, and with the forces came the fair Rowena, daughter of Hengist, who was introduced by her father to the infatuated monarch, and her fatal wise Heil Lafud cunning caused Vortigern to repudiate his faithful cause to win the Saxon booty. Hengist now renounced his allegiance and joined the Caledonian savages to ravage Britain from one end to the other, and Hengist obtained the earldom of Kent as his daughter's bridal portion. As soon as Hengist obtained the Principality of Kent, he anchored for more and invited over others of his countrymen, so that the British people, seeing that through the infatuation of their traitor king, who for his wife's sake loved the Saxon above all other nations, they should be utterly consumed by them, at length revolted, and with one voice chose Vortimer his son as king, who sallied forth at their head to drive the Saxons from the land. 4 times he defeated them, but in one of the engagements, Cartigern, his brother, and Horsa, brother to Hengist, slew each other. The Saxons now sent Vortigern to his son to obtain permission to depart for Germany. Vortimer, however, had a worse enemy than the Saxons in his stepmother Rowena, who succeeded in poisoning him, and Vortigern, the traitor, was restored to the throne of Britain. As soon as Hengist heard of the death of the dreaded victor, he raised an army of 300,000 men, so says Geoffrey of Monmouth, and at once bent his course to Britain. Vortigern resolved to encounter this host in battle, but by Rowena's craft it was arranged that there should be a meeting between the British king and the Saxon chief, both parties to assemble unarmed lest contention should arise. They met at a place on Salisbury Plain, now known as Stonehenge, and Hengist, having armed his retinue with long knives, which they concealed under their cloaks, massacred 460 of his knights and made Vortigern prisoner, and one British knight named Idol, Count of Gloucester, alone escaped, by slaying 70 of the enemy. Vortigern, however, ransomed himself by giving up to Hengist the whole Oigria, and he was supposed to be privy to the plot. He was never afterwards looked upon with favour by the Britons. In this treacherous plot of the Long Knives, nearly all of the nobles of Cymru were slain. Loegria having been thus ceded to the Saxons, Vortigern betook himself to the fastnesses of Cambria, and at length, in his despair, he had recourse to magicians, for there came messengers unto him who cried, "Arise, Lord King, for the enemy is come, even Ambrosius and Uther, upon whose throne thou sittest, and multitudes have joined them, and they have sworn a great oath to slay thee ere the year be out, and even now they march toward thee as the north wind of winter for bitterness and haste." At these words, the visage of Vortigern waxed white, and he rose in haste, and sent for all the best artificers and builders, and commanded them to build in the most westerly part of his dominions a great and strong castle, to which he might fly for refuge. And cried he, "Let the work be done within 100 days, or I will surely spare no life amongst you all." Then all the host of craftsmen, in haste, fixed on a piece of land whereon to build the tower, and began to lay in the foundations. But no sooner were the walls raised above the ground than all their work was overturned and destroyed by night, and no man perceived how or by whom it was done. The same thing happened night after night. At length all the workmen sought out the king, and throwing themselves upon their faces before him, beseeched him to interfere and help them by the aid of his wise men. Filled with consternation and dread, the king called his astrologers and soothsayers, and took counsel with them as to the meaning of these strange things, and how to overcome them. The wizards worked their spells and incantations, and at length declared that nothing but the blood of a youth born without mortal father, sprinkled on the foundations of the castle, could make it stand. Vortigern forthwith sent messengers throughout the land to discover if any such miraculous child could be found. And as some of them were passing down the streets of Caerfyrddin, Carmarthen in Wales, they saw a band of lads quarrelling, and heard one of them shout out to another, "Avaunt, thou imp, thou art not fit to be amongst us, son of no mortal man, go find thy father." The messengers, on hearing these words, looked earnestly at the lad, and inquired his name. One said that no one knew his parentage, another cried out his name is Merlin, and a third that the foul fiend was his father. Whereupon the officers seized the lad and carried him before the king. No sooner was he brought before the king than he said in a loud voice, "For what cause am I thus dragged here?" "My magicians," replied Vortigern, "told me to seek out a child that had no mortal father, and to sprinkle my castle walls with his blood, that they may stand." "Order those magicians to come before me," said Merlin. And the king ordered them to come and stand in the presence of Merlin, who cried to them, "Because ye know not what it is that hinders the foundation of the castle to stand, ye have advised my blood as a cement. But rather tell me what there is below the ground that will not suffer the tower to stand." The magicians at these words were dumb with fear. Then said Merlin to Vortigern, "I pray thee, king, that workmen may be ordered to dig deep down into the ground until they come to a great pool of water." When the workmen had dug a great depth, they came to a pool. Then turning to the magicians, Merlin said, "Tell me now, ye false sycophants, what there is beneath the pool." But they could not answer him the question. Then said Merlin to the king, "Command that this pool be drained, and at the bottom 2 huge dragons will be found asleep. But when the night comes, they will awake and fight. In their fierce struggle, the ground will shake and tremble, so that the foundation of the tower cannot stand." The king was exceedingly surprised at the words of Merlin, and he ordered the pool to be drained forthwith. And when the pool was dried up, the 2 dragons were found fast asleep, as Merlin had foretold. To see what would happen, Vortigern kept watch during the night, and he saw the dragons, one of which was white and the other red, rise up and come near to each other, and begin a sore fight, and cast forth fire with their breath. In this terrible encounter, the white dragon gained the mastery, and drove the red dragon to the further end of the lake. The red dragon turned on his pursuer, and renewing the combat, forced his enemy to retire in his turn. But in the end, the red dragon was worsted, and the white dragon disappeared and was no more seen. When the conflict was over, the king called Merlin to his side and demanded what these things meant. Then was Merlin full of grief, and he cried out his prophecy, wherein was first told the coming of King Arthur. Woe to the red dragon, which figureth the British nation, for his banishment cometh quickly, and his lurking holes shall be seized by the white dragon, who represents the Saxons, whom thou hast called to this land. The mountains shall be levelled with the valleys, and the rivers of the valleys shall run blood. Cities shall be burned, and churches laid in ruins, till at length the oppressed shall turn for a time and prevail against the stranger. For a bear shall arise at Cornwall, and rend them and trample their necks beneath his feet. The island shall be subject to his power, and he shall take the forests of Gaul. The house of Romulus shall dread him, all the world shall fear him, and his end shall no man know. He shall be immortal in the eyes of his people, and his words shall be food to those that tell them. But as for thee, O Vortigern, flee thou the sons of Constantine, for they shall burn thee in thy tower. For thy own ruin wast thou traitor to thy father, and didst bring the Saxon heathen to the land. Ambrosius and Uther are even now on their way from Brittany to revenge their father's murder, and the blood of the white dragon shall waste thy country, and shall lick thy blood. Find out some refuge if thou canst, but who may escape the doom of God? The king, when he heard this, trembled greatly, but said nothing in reply, for his conscience smote him. He, however, hasted the builders of his tower by night and day, and rested not until he had taken refuge within its walls. The Britons now hailed Ambrosius, whom they called Emrys the rightful king, with joy, and flocked to his standard. But he, before leading them to expel the Saxon invaders, determined to first deal a death blow to Vortigern. With this intent, he marched to Cambria, and came before the tower which the usurper had set up. He then harangued his knights and men-at-arms, and cried out, "Be revenged on him that hath ruined Britain, and murdered my father and you a king." Then he rushed with many thousands at the fortress, but was driven back. He then caused burning brands to be cast into the building from all sides. A mighty conflagration ensued, and Vortigern perished in the flames.